So Psalm 42 and 43. Do you know that God likes to play games? How many of you know that? I mean real games. God, for example, likes to play Monopoly, and why wouldn't he? He owns everything, correct? Yes? I like to talk with people too in church, so help me out with an occasional attaboy or amen or whatever. God also likes to play the game Sorry. How many of you ever played the game Sorry? Love that game, little board game, where if you knock somebody off the board, you send them back home and you say, sorry. Only, you don't say it like that. You have to squish up your face in a kind of false compassion and go, oh, I'm sorry. You have to start over. Turn to your neighbor right now if you're close, because you're going to get a chance to do this sometime this week, and put on that false compassion and go, sorry. Come on, I mean it. Do it. Sorry. I know that God loves to play sorry because whenever I ask him stuff, half the time, like 2 weeks ago, I asked God, Lord, can this be the year that my Minnesota Vikings win the Super Bowl? And I've been a Viking fan my whole life. I grew up in Iowa, and I said, Lord, they had that miraculous finish against New Orleans, and Lord, are playing in their home stadium. Can this be the year? Oh, God of the outcast and forlorn, would you give us favor this year? And God turned to me, of course, and said, oh, sorry. No, the Vikings are not going to win the Super Bowl in case they're not going to win your whole life. God loves to play sorry. What's another game God likes to play? Clue. How many of you played Clue? You know, Samson in the cave with the jawbone? Clue? God loves to play Clue. I would have loved for God to have revealed to us before we moved out here everything that was going to happen and how long things would take and all. Wouldn't that be great if God gave you an email for the next week with every conversation, every meeting, everything you were in? Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. No. What's God do? He gives you a little envelope with one tiny little clue in it, and he hands it to you. And he expects you to go on that. He speaks in still small voices and quiet whispers. He doesn't give us a lamp to our whole path. What does he give us? A lamp to our feet. God loves Clue. And God also loves to play hide and seek. Have you ever had an experience where you were walking with God, everything was hunky-dory, you thought it was fine, and you look around one day and he's gone. And you pray, and your prayers bounce to the ground, and you're looking everywhere, and it's like he's just completely disappeared on you. And then suddenly he reappears a while later, and it's like, well, what is that? It's hide and seek. How many of you have ever played hide and seek with God? Some of you are maybe going through hide and seek right now as we're speaking. And all joking aside, it's not a lot of fun when that happens. So what are you supposed to do when you go through that? And every child of God, at various places throughout their life, will experience this with God. It's such a common experience that there was a 16th century saint named St. John of the Cross, and he came up with a little phrase to describe that experience that has stuck ever since. He called it, any of you know, the dark night of the soul. Very appropriate words. What are you supposed to do when you experience that? Well, that's what Psalm 42 and 43 are all about. These two psalms belong together. They're actually two psalms and one song. And somewhere early in history, they got separated, like two brothers at Union Station that got on different buses. These two psalms clearly belong together, as you'll see as we go along in the next few minutes. These two psalms have been especially meaningful to me in this adventure of faith that Janice and I are on right now. In fact, I've prayed these two psalms so many times that I have now committed them basically to memory. Everybody loves to preach about living by faith. Everybody loves to talk about getting out of the boat and walking on the water and trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Oh, we love that. We love to sing about it. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. But when God actually calls you to do it, we start picking lint out of our belly buttons. Well, these two psalms describe this experience, being alone with God. And the thing is, this walk of faith is frightening because what happens is you're giving up this certain thing that you have, or you have this certain thing ripped out of your hands, and you have to face this uncertain thing that's in front of you. That's frightening. Whether it's a cancer ward or widowhood, what do you do when you go through a season like that? I'm convinced that David wrote these two psalms. It says sons of Korah, but they were on David's worship staff. And I think what happened is that David handed this song off to his men and said, do something with this. Because this has got David's fingerprints all over it. There are 3 stanzas in this one song, and it ends, each stanza ends with the very same chorus, the same exact words. And with these 3 stanzas, we find 3 lessons that David wants us to know about what to do when it feels like God has left us. So let's look at the first stanza. And let's look at Psalm 42. I'm going to read verses 1 to 4 first. As a deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all the day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul. How I would go with the throng, and I would lead them in procession to the house of God. With glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping festival. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. Here's the first thing David wants us to know. If you're going through a dark night of the soul, you need to learn to do this. Look back in the past with gratitude and worship. Those 2 blanks for each of these points. Why don't you jot that down just so you remember this time. Look back in the past with gratitude and worship. In other words, call to mind a time in your life when God has been faithful to you, when you've experienced God's goodness. Here is David, and he is remembering a time in his life when he was leading the people of God in worship. The occasion of the psalm is probably when he fled from his son Absalom, if you remember that story. There were 2 times in David's life when he felt this dark night of the soul, where he felt this separation from God. Early in his life when he fled from Saul, if you remember that, and spent 7 or 8 years hiding in caves and sleeping at night with a sword under his pillow. And then later in his life, when his son Absalom rebelled against him, it was the aftermath of that sordid affair with David and Bathsheba. And again, David left his throne, he left Jerusalem, he had to hightail it out of there. He lost everything. And that's why, as he's fleeing, he's remembering what it was like to have led God's people in worship. The problem with us, and nod your head if you agree with this, is we're so forgetful. Would you agree with that? You know, God does something amazing in our lives. He gives us some wonderful provision, and our hearts are glad until the next time a test comes or the wheels fall off, and suddenly we're tempted to grouse and grumble and doubt all over again. With us, it's God, what have you done for me lately? With David, it's God, what have you done? Period. And he tries to remember those things as a point of spiritual discipline. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not his benefits. It's important that we do that. Because God has shown himself faithful so many times in our lives, you would think that a wise and mature Christian would do what the next time things get tough? You would think they would say to themselves, okay, God, you helped me that last time when I went through that last test. Therefore, you're going to help me again. We see this idea in the Old Testament back in the days of Samuel. God brought Israel through another clear and present danger, as he always did with Israel. And Samuel did something unique after God's deliverance this time. He built a stone altar in front of in the middle of the town, and he set it up before the people, and he called it an Ebenezer, which is a Hebrew word that means stone of help. And Samuel said to the people, when you look at this altar of remembrance, what you are to call to mind is that up to this point, God has helped you. And when you look at that altar, that Ebenezer, it should encourage you to know that God will help you again if you seek him. I believe that the Bible in this story is calling each one of us to set up Ebenezers in our house. Not of the Scrooge variety. We already probably have a couple of those in our houses. Some of you just looked at your neighbor. I don't know why you did that. We should set up Ebenezer's of the altar variety. Yes? So, one of the things that has helped Janice and I during this year-and-a-half journey that we have been on is we look through our home. We've been married 33 years now. That's pretty good, isn't it? I bet some of you can beat that. But we've been walking with Jesus a long time, and scattered throughout our home are all these mementos and things that are really Ebenezer's for us. So one of the things we have are these little stone cottages that we bought in England. And what these remind us of is a year early in our marriage when Janice and I went as missionaries. And we served a church in inner city London, England. Janice, when I first met her, had a love for missions. She still does. She was going to go on a year or two mission somewhere. And I was falling in love with her. And my attitude was like, not without me, you're not. And so 3 years after we were married, with 6-month-old Hannah in tow, we went to London, England. We moved away from our place where we lived. We left our family. We left our community. We left our... Janice, we've done this before. And we went thousands of miles away to London, England. It was one of the hardest things we ever did. Scary. And you know what? God met us in a real beautiful way that year, and it changed the whole trajectory of our life. I had a journalism degree in my back pocket. That's what I was going to do with my life. But 6 months into that one-year experience, I knew I'd never darken the door of a newsroom. And when we got back to the States, I enrolled in seminary and never looked back. Speaking of seminary, I have another Ebenezer I brought. This is a bottle of Dom Perignon. Anybody know what that is? It's one of the most expensive champagnes that you can buy. And this reminds me of seminary. And I know what some of you are thinking right now. Oh, that bottle reminds you how you got through seminary, Pastor Bear. I was in the Hebrew class, honey. It was the hardest thing ever, but that's done. No, don't go there. It's not what this bottle reminds me of. This bottle reminds me of God's provision during that time. Seminary is a tough stretch. I worked as a waiter during seminary and worked myself up to several restaurants. And the last restaurant I worked at was the Boston Sheraton, which was the mountaintop of waiting experiences. We did tableside cooking. You never get stiffed as a server in one of these restaurants. In fact, the last table on my last night left me a $100 bill. They heard it was my last night. They wanted me to go out with a bang. And so I look at this. This bottle is on my desk, and it reminds me of God's provision during a very difficult time. But that's not the main encouragement I get from this. I have always made it my aim to be, for Jesus, a winsome witness. In other words, Paul says in 2 Timothy 2 that the Lord's servant must never be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, enduring others patiently. That's what a winsome witness is. We have to love the lost back to Jesus. We can't yell the lost back to Jesus. There's too much yelling going on in our culture today. Yes? Do you agree with that? We live in a toxic culture. I think if people see love and listening and caring, they'll respond. Anyway, I've always made it my goal. The staff at this restaurant was a small, intimate staff. There were only 9 or 10 of us. And I worked there for a year, and I made it my goal that I was going to get to know the stories of each of those dear people. Not one of them that knew Jesus. And they were going to get to know me and about the Lord I loved over the course of that year. And I didn't have to win the battle in the first day. I'd have a year to work with him, and I did that. There was a gay man on the staff. And I got to know his story, and he taught me of the struggle of someone who grows up without a father, who grows up without a model of masculinity and femininity, who grows up in a culture with all these confusing messages. Oh, there's not 2 genders, there's 67! Of a person who gets hurt as puberty comes on and lays in stone some bad habits and feelings. That man taught me how to bring compassion to the table when you talk about sexuality with people. And he heard from me everything I believe about what the Bible says about human sexuality. And how there's 2 genders, and how it's male and female, and married for life. And On my last night, after the last table left and the restaurant was dark, and I went back to clean up, to walk out of the restaurant for the last time, and lo and behold, all the staff had come back. Only a couple of us worked that night, but everyone was back, and they wanted to say goodbye. And Amy, the supervisor, said, Bear, we've all chipped in to buy you this bottle of Dom Perignon. We want to raise a toast to your future, and we want to thank you for being a part of us. And we are going to miss you. And I pray to God that I will see some of them in the kingdom of heaven one day, because of seeds that were planted, because I did my best to be a winsome witness. And this bottle on my desk reminds me of that. You love people back to life. You love the lost back to life. So, my friends, you go home this afternoon, or this evening at the latest, before this sermon evaporates in your mind, and I want you to find some Ebenezers in your home. And if you don't see any, I want you to set some up. I want you to set up a picture, a plaque, something, a memento that will remind you of how good God has been to you in your life. And then the next time he disappears and life gets hard, would you look at that Ebenezer and say, up to this point, God has helped me. Lord, I'm going to seek you. I'm going to trust you.